1997. Do you remember that year? Maybe you weren't born, maybe you were. Here's a quick recap of what happened in 1997. Major news stories included Thrust SSC sets the first supersonic land speed record, Steve Jobs returns to run Apple computers, Hong Kong returns to Chinese rule, Heaven's Gate cult commits mass suicides in California, Diana, Princess of Wales, dies in a car crash in Paris, Mars Pathfinder lands on the surface of Mars, the avian flu virus found in Hong Kong, chickens, 1.5 million killed to stop the spread. French truck drivers form roadblocks around the country at ports, oil refineries, and major roads. Stock markets around the world crash. Gas was $1.22 a gallon in the U.S. and £2.70 in the U.K. Great Britain handed back Hong Kong to China, and the Dow was less than 8,000. So that's what happened, the big stories, but something else happened in 1997, and that was 21 CFR Part 11, electronic records, electronic signatures came into law. In this episode, we're going to talk about computer software assurance, a better way to validate, and what's all the hype about computer software assurance. Why do we need it? Why is it important? How is it different or similar to computer systems validation, the way we've been doing it for a long time? And has it really been working? Has computer systems validation been working? So the old way, traditional way, computer systems validation, current way is computer systems validation, and the new way is promised to be computer software assurance. Now, I mentioned in 1997, 21 CFR Part 11 electronic records, electronic signatures took effect. Then, later in 2002, guidance for industry came out 5 years later. And the reason for that is it was realized that, quite frankly, we were going a little bit too far. We overkill on Part 11. Cost industry billions of dollars. And so the guidance came out for industry to take a least burdensome approach and integrate software management and risk management. Now, this is very important. In 2002, the guidance for industry was to take a least burdensome approach and essentially risk-based validation. Now, in 2019, the CSA initiative took off, and now it's really gaining traction in 2021, being socialized, and more people are learning about it and embracing it. So 21 CFR Part 11 is 24 years old. Guidance is approximately 19 years old. Technology has advanced exponentially, yet in our industry in life sciences, we've been very slow to move. So we need something. We need to take a look at the guidance, and we need to take a look at the laws in effect and determine if they're still relevant today, or can we do something better? I mean, isn't any good quality system, a characteristic of a good quality system is continuous improvement? So if that's the case, why have we waited 24 years for the law and 19 years for the guidance? It's noteworthy that in the European Union, regulations also came about. In 1992 was Annex 11, computerized systems. That was before 21 CFR Part 11, and then in 2011, Annex 11, computerized systems, was updated. But for now, for CSA, we're just going to focus on the FDA, United States domestic regulation here, but FDA applies globally as well. 21 CFR Part 11 has been very costly. Estimates go up from $5 million to $400 million or more. That was from a source of Frost and Sullivan. And this is based upon a company's size and also the systems that a company uses. So we know that it has cost a lot of money, and we need to do something different to basically right-size validation activities. The big difference between computer system validation and computer software assurance is this. Computer systems validation focuses in on documentation, then testing, assurance needs, critical thinking at the very bottom, last but not least. You've probably been in scenarios where if you have a 6-foot tall stack of paper compared to a 3-foot, well, that 6-foot tall validation package must be twice as good as the 3-foot, or maybe 2 feet is better than 1 feet. So we were measuring the validation of a system based upon the amount of paper we generated, but really all that meant was we generated a lot of paper, so it was deceiving. The other thing, a myth basically, is that if we did all of this testing, the system should be bug-free, which no system is really bug-free. But that just means that you've done a lot of testing, but it begs the question, have you done the right testing? Was your testing strategy correct in the first place? And then you look at the assurance needs and finally critical thinking. Well, CSA flips that paradigm and it places critical thinking at the top and documentation at the end. So whereas computer systems validation was documentation, testing, assurance needs, critical thinking, CSA is critical thinking first, then assurance needs, then testing, and as a result you get your documentation. So critical thinking is put at the very top. And doesn't that make sense? When we approach a problem, shouldn't we have an open mind? Shouldn't we not bring bias into the situation and figure out the best way how to solve a problem, the best way how to validate a system? And then when we get everybody's input and we identify the best way that we're going to tackle this problem, figure out what the assurance needs are, what we need to do in order to consider this system as validated, it's attained a validated state, and then with those assurance needs in hand, with procedures, etc., we can commence with the formal testing and resolve the deviations. And the end result is we have a validation package. So again, CSA flips the paradigm. It's the same stuff, just in reverse order. Now, this is a big change because our industry moves very slow, and people are resistant to change. We've done it this way for a long time. Why change it? This is the way we've always done it. This is the way everybody's doing it. This is generally accepted industry standard practice. So you hear these things all of the time. But I haven't seen a book of generally accepted industry standard practices that you can pull off a shelf and reference. Rather, these industry standard practices are things that you gain over the course of time, knowledge and wisdom, the things and ways that you have been trained to perform certain things. And when you're first in industry, you're very green and malleable, and you're accepting the way things are taught by a subject matter expert or guru at that time, and you absorb all of that information, and that belief system becomes your own. And then fast forward years and years later, and you still carry those things with you. It could be a bias or a prejudice, and you apply that, thinking that's the way it's always done. That's the way everybody's doing it. But if you're an auditor or a consultant and you've seen many different companies, you realize there are many different ways that people perform validation. Sure, things are pretty similar with GAMP, and there's similarities there, and the val plan, the requirements, the qualification protocols, the summary report, trace matrix. Sure, there's a lot of similarities, but there are also significant differences in the way people interpret that. As a matter of fact, when you look at the regulations in 21 CFR Part 11, systems must be validated with objective evidence to prove that they consistently perform as intended. And the intended use of the system directly relates to your user requirements, and the user requirements are tested through the PQ, again in the traditional way. Basically, with CSV and CSA, in addition to critical thinking, assurance needs, testing, and then documentation in that order, CSA does offer something a little bit different or highlight something a little bit different, and that is you can do ad hoc testing. Now, you could have done that before, but it really never came from the agency that you could or should, or it's a good practice to do that. And so now it's being talked about that, consider ad hoc testing, a risk-based approach, high, medium, and low. So, of course, with a high-risk system, you're going to do the most rigorous validation, and that would follow more of the traditional CSV lines. But when you go down the risk ranking and you get to medium risk, well, that's somewhat discretionary to what is appropriate. Maybe it's the full validation package, or maybe it's some subset of that. And then when you get to low risk, then you can really start determining what other things you can do. Can I just leverage the upstream testing? Can I do ad hoc testing, exploratory testing? And if I do that, how do I document that? Because remember, validation requires evidence that you performed the validation. So those are some subtle differences with CSV, but it's still risk. You're still doing a risk-based approach, and that's consistent with the guidance that came out in 2002. And a least burdensome approach. And the reason the least burdensome approach is extremely important is because if you have a burdensome approach and you're validating all of your systems to the same degree of rigor, then that means that low-risk systems are being validated as if they were high risk, and the resources are constrained. So in effect, high-risk systems are not getting the attention they need. So if you have a least burdensome approach, you do not have the resource demands, and you're focusing your attention with the risk-based approach on the true high-risk system and doing your due diligence there, and the low risk is going to not require the same degree of rigor. Now, a thought with a low-risk system, if it's truly low risk or no risk, then if a problem happens, there's not going to be an impact. It's low or no risk. Or if there's an impact, it's negligible. It's not even noteworthy, as a matter of fact. If you've identified a requirement or a system as low risk and you have a problem, and that problem does have an impact, then your risk management process is incorrect, because that requirement or system should not have been flagged as a low risk in the first place. When we look at CSA, the new approach, computer software assurance, born out of the case for quality, an effort by the FDA to identify a way to improve quality, recognizing that we could do better in our industry like other industries. It's in effect creating a quality culture that it becomes our belief system, and we'll have more episodes on the quality culture, and it's important. It's actually the name of the podcast here. But out of the case for quality, CSA was born. So there's got to be a better way of doing this to make improvements, especially now since technology continues to advance exponentially, and we have great technology tools available to us today. And we should be using those tools rather than relying upon paper. We're one of the probably few, maybe only industries that still relies upon paper. I haven't done the research there, so I'll have to double check that. But not a lot of industries rely upon paper. Finance, the stock market. Put it to you this way, the stock market, I don't think they're dealing with ticker tapes anymore. So everything is electronic. You can buy a house electronically. You can do many things electronically. And our industry in life sciences tends to just rely upon paper. However, the pandemic we're living changed all of that, because paper is a host, and carrying that paper into a clean room could spread contamination, and we're all working remotely, and we need to be able to have access to information, and if you have hard copy archives, that's nearly impossible to accomplish. So what's all the hype about CSA? Well, it's it's kind of the green light to go ahead, but the green light to go ahead and do what you've already been doing, but better before, because there's really nothing different. Maybe the subtle differences are ad hoc or exploratory testing, but it's still a risk-based approach. It's still least burdensome. That was the 2002 guidance. And if we go back to the original regulation, it says systems must be validated to demonstrate that they perform their consistent intended performance. And so nothing has really changed. I would implore you to go ahead and dig into CSA a little bit more. We'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these topics as we go forward in future episodes, such as critical thinking. What is it? How do you think critically? Haven't we always been doing that? And so that's something we'll talk about. And what does it really mean assurance needs, and what testing is appropriate, the different types of testing we can leverage, and then a conversation about documentation. What's the appropriate documentation? As a matter of fact, are documents, or is it really records in a system that we're all driving towards? Now, this is extremely important because last episode was on Industry 4.0, Pharma 4.0, and if you haven't listened to episode 2, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. Because with Industry 4.0, Pharma 4.0, you have to digitize. So you have to go paperless, you have to digitize your solutions in order to get into that sphere in Pharma 4.0. It has to be electronic. Your paper-based systems are not going to work in Pharma 4.0 because it's a technologically driven digital world. And where we're headed is truly continuous validation, continuous verification, leveraging the power of IoT devices, technology in general, artificial intelligence, machine learning, leveraging all of that. But we have to do a better job, and we have to find ways to get technology out there faster, but make sure it's still validated and it's secure. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and next week we're going to be talking about something that is very interesting. Hopefully all of the shows that we have on here are interesting, and the topic for next week is going to be, I want to get the title right here, How Blockchain Will Impact the Future, Understanding Blockchain Potential. And we have a special guest with us who happens to be an expert in this respective area, and we'll have him on. So tune in next week, next Tuesday. And if you didn't listen to the prior episode 2, Industry 4.0, Pharma 4.0, go listen to that, and hopefully you've enjoyed this episode.